You think you're intelligent. Then why do you keep saying things that make you sound weak, blind, and scared? Not loud, not angry, just weak. You defend yourself with phrases that quietly kill your credibility. You push people away with sentences that sound smart, but reek of fear. I already know that. That's impossible. That's not my fault. These don't make you look strong. They make you look fragile, too fragile to learn, to face challenge, or to take responsibility. Real intelligence isn't about what you know. It's about what you're willing to unlearn. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a man can do is to shut up before another foolish sentence costs him everything he hasn't yet noticed he's losing. That was the first warning. 1. Declaring certainty without mastery. The man who says, "I already know that," has already chosen not to grow. It sounds harmless, even confident. But buried inside that phrase is something corrosive, a mind no longer willing to see. Not because it's full, but because it's fragile. Too fragile to admit there might be more. The truth? Most men who say, "I already know that," are terrified of looking unprepared. So they choose pride over perspective, control over clarity. And that's how ignorance survives, by pretending it's knowledge. I once watched a man in a leadership workshop interrupt his instructor mid-sentence. Yeah, I already know that." He didn't just cut off the lesson, he cut off his own access to power. The instructor smiled, didn't push, didn't argue, just paused and asked a better question. Do you know it, or do you live it? Because those aren't the same. The room went silent, and so did the man. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly, "You cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything." That's not poetry. That's a blade sharp enough to sever your ego from your intelligence. Because intelligence is not about accumulation. It's about receptivity. The ability to hear something for the 100th time and still catch the detail that changes everything. I've seen master craftsmen, men with hands like oak trees and decades of knowledge, lean in to listen to beginners. Not because they need the information, but because they remember. Growth doesn't die when you get older. It dies when you stop listening. When you say, "I already know that," you're not just pushing others away. You're barricading yourself from depth. You're choosing to guard your ego instead of sharpening your insight. And worse, you're broadcasting to everyone around you that you're no longer teachable. That's not strength. That's mental laziness in disguise. The Stoics called this self-mastery, the ability to delay the need to appear competent long enough to actually become it. So the next time someone speaks and you feel that impulse to nod, wave it off, move on. Don't. Pause. Breathe. Listen like your life depends on what you might have missed, because it just might. Second, and more dangerous, dismissing possibility with polished fear. There's a particular type of man who seems rational, measured, cautious. But listen closely, and you'll notice something else. He uses logic like a shield, not to protect truth, but to protect fear. You suggest a new idea, and he scoffs. You propose a challenge, and he shrugs. You ask a real question, and he replies with 2 words that sound clean, tidy, and responsible. That's impossible. But intelligent men, truly intelligent men, know this. That sentence doesn't describe the task. It describes the man saying it. Impossible is not an analysis. It's a confession of fear, of laziness, of the desire to stay untouched by uncertainty. The Stoics warned us about this exact delusion. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." In other words, the danger isn't out there. It's in here. It's the voice that says, I might fail, so I won't even try. Years ago, I worked with a man who had all the markers of intelligence: sharp suits, smooth presentations. He ran meetings like a general until something unfamiliar showed up. A new market, a new idea, a new method. His response was always the same: "That's not going to work. Too risky. We don't do things that way." And just like that, possibility died at the door. We didn't just lose opportunities. We lost momentum, curiosity, courage. What he didn't realize, or maybe refused to see, was this: he wasn't being logical. He was being scared. Scared of being wrong. Scared of change. Scared of trying and being seen as fallible. And fear, when dressed up in logic, looks almost respectable, until you realize it's been quietly shrinking your life. Marcus Aurelius cut through this with a single line: "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Which means, you don't get to control outcomes, but you do control your willingness to step forward. A man who says, "That's impossible," has already surrendered, not to reality but to his own imagination. He's not describing the mountain. He's describing his legs. Too tired to climb. Too proud to admit he's afraid of falling. So, what does an intelligent man say instead? He says, "What's the next small step? What part of this is actually in my control? What haven't I tried yet?" He doesn't need guarantees. He doesn't need to know the whole path. He just needs to know the direction. Because in Stoicism, courage isn't loud. It isn't reckless. It's persistence grounded in clarity. And that clarity shows up like this. When others say, "That's impossible," he quietly begins. Not with confidence, but with movement. That's not fantasy. That's wisdom. Because the real danger isn't failing. It's convincing yourself you don't even have permission to begin. Third, and most quietly destructive, the reflex to blame before you reflect. Few sentences feel as justified in the moment as, "That's not my fault." It's fast. It's sharp. It feels like armor. But intelligent men know something most don't. Every time you say that phrase, you give away power. Quietly. Permanently. It's a mental transaction. You trade ownership for comfort, growth for defense, and it feels like strength until your life refuses to improve. Blame is addictive because it tastes like clarity, but it delivers paralysis. Let me be clear. Accepting responsibility doesn't mean taking the fall for everything. It doesn't mean being a doormat. It means choosing influence over innocence. Because once you say, "It wasn't my fault," you've just placed your future in someone else's hands. Stoic wisdom doesn't coddle this kind of thinking. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Notice the word, react. Not retreat. Not justify. Not explain. React with discipline, ownership, and forward motion. Years ago, I watched a man lose a critical opportunity. Client walked. Money vanished. His team unraveled. And his response? It wasn't me. The team dropped the ball. Market conditions were bad. They didn't follow my lead. All possibly true, but completely useless. Because while he was defending his innocence, he missed the point. The situation still belonged to him. And the chance to change it, to learn, to adapt, to grow, was slipping through his hands while he protected his pride. Blame is clever. It can be factually correct and psychologically lethal. It keeps your hands clean and your future empty. Responsibility, on the other hand, is messy. But it's how real men re-enter the arena. It might sound like, "I didn't speak clearly. I ignored the signs. I let things slide too long, even if others made bigger mistakes. You find your peace, because that's the part you can shape next time. And when you do that, you send a message not just to others, but to yourself. I am not passive in my own life. I shape what happens next. That's leadership, not on a stage, but in your daily discipline. The Stoics were obsessed with this, because they knew that when you blame others, you become a spectator in your own existence. But when you accept your role, even in failure, you unlock the only power that matters, the power to become someone who doesn't repeat it. You can stay innocent, or you can become powerful, but you can't be both. And every time you defend your ego with, "That's not my fault," you quietly tell the world, "I'm not ready to lead. I'm not ready to grow. I'm not ready to win." But the man who says, "Here's what I could have done better," he's not bowing. He's building a stronger mind, a sharper future, a quieter kind of dominance. It sounds noble, stoic even, independent, strong. But don't confuse stubbornness for self-mastery, because the man who refuses help is rarely the man who doesn't need it. He's just the man who's been trained to see asking as weakness. The truth? This sentence, "I don't need help," is not a badge. It's a cage. And inside that cage is a man drowning quietly while trying to look composed. We live in a culture that worships the lone wolf, the self-made man, the image of the silent warrior who carries everything himself. But let's be honest, that man, he often breaks in private, slowly, invisibly, until one day he disappears emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and no one saw it coming. Why? Because he made sure of it. The Stoics would call that pride, not virtue. Even Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the most powerful empire in the world, didn't pretend he could do it alone. He wrote in Meditations about his teachers, mentors, and friends, the people who shaped his thinking, checked his blind spots, and challenged his assumptions. The most powerful man alive openly thanked others for helping him think better. So who are you to pretend you're above it? There was a time in my life I tried to carry everything. Work pressure, family tension, unspoken anxiety, and I told myself the classic masculine lie. This is just what being strong feels like. But that wasn't strength. It was corrosion. Pride wrapped around fear, like rust around steel. I wasn't holding it together. I was holding myself hostage. Then one day I cracked. Not in public, but in private. One sentence to a friend I trusted: "I can't do this alone anymore." And that moment saved me. Because what came next wasn't judgment. It was support, connection, relief. That small act of humility gave me access to what I had been denying myself. Perspective, wisdom, clarity. Here's what the Stoics really taught. You are responsible for your mind, but that doesn't mean you must build it alone. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But mastery does not mean isolation. It means knowing when to ask the right questions, to the right people, at the right time. A man who never asks for help isn't strong. He's scared of being seen needing something. But an intelligent man, he knows, I am not the center of all wisdom, but I can seek it, and that seeking is power. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, the next time your mind tells you, don't show weakness, just keep going. Pause. Ask yourself, is this my strength speaking, or my ego clinging to control? Because you can die on the hill of self-reliance, or you can climb that hill with help, with allies, with your dignity intact. Intelligent men don't pretend they don't need help. They choose when to receive it. And in that choice, they rise. Fifth, the lie that ends more lives than failure ever could. I'm too old for that. Or worse, that's just how I am. Say those words out loud, and you've just signed a quiet death certificate. Not for your body, but for your evolution. Men don't die when their heart stops. They die the moment they decide they've already peaked. The moment they stop seeing themselves as someone who can still become more. This isn't humility. It's surrender. A resignation letter to life, stamped with false logic. I'm too old for that. Sounds mature, realistic, safe. But it's not realism, it's retreat. What you're really saying is, I'm too scared to be new at something again. Too proud to be seen trying. Too comfortable with my limits to test them. The Stoics didn't respect age as a number. They respected age as raw material. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that death could come at any moment, not to depress himself, but to sharpen his hunger. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. He knew, as long as you're breathing, you're still becoming. And to say, I'm too old, is to spit on that breath. I once met a man who, at 63, decided to learn carpentry. Not for money, not for legacy, but because he realized he had spent his entire life consuming and never once built something with his hands. It was uncomfortable, slow, sometimes humiliating. But 1 year later, he gifted his daughter a table made with trembling fingers and stubborn patience. And I watched her cry. Not because it was beautiful, but because her father had finally come back to life. Now let's take the other phrase. That's just how I am. Harmless? Number. That phrase is the sound of a man locking himself in a cell and calling it home. It's what people say when they don't want to change, but also can't face who they've become. I have a short temper. I don't do emotions. I've always been this way. No, you haven't. You've just repeated that sentence so many times. You think it's part of your personality. But intelligent men, real Stoics, know better. They understand that character is not concrete. It's clay, and the hand that shapes it is yours. Change is uncomfortable. But do you know what's worse? Staying exactly the same and pretending it's noble. The Stoics taught that nature is change. You are nature. So when you resist growth, you don't just stall, you rot. Intelligence isn't about proving who you are. It's about refining who you could be, again and again, until the final day. So ask yourself, is this really who I am, or just who I've been too long to question? And if the answer makes you uneasy, good. That means you're not dead yet, and you've still got time to rewrite the ending. Sixth, the most seductive lie of all. I'll do it later. It sounds like strategy. It sounds responsible. It even sounds mature, but it's not. It's fear. Fear dressed up as planning. Fear wearing the mask of good timing. And it's the quietest killer of potential you'll ever meet. Because later is where most men bury the lives they were meant to live. They don't intend to. They just keep pushing things an inch at a time. The difficult conversation, the apology, the side project, the healing, the risk, until one day they look up and there's no time left. Later didn't just fade, it betrayed them. I once knew a man named Thomas, respected, resilient, always busy. He used to say, "I'll call my father next weekend. It's been a hectic month." But next weekend turned into next quarter. And then his father was gone. No goodbye, no closure. Just a phone filled with unsent drafts, and a heart full of things left unsaid. He told me once, years later, it wasn't the death that crushed me. It was how available I was, for everything except what mattered. The Stoics didn't wait, not because they were impulsive, but because they were clear-eyed about time. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's not a threat. That's a wake-up call. A reminder that you are not owed the luxury of later. So when you say, 'I'll do it later,' you're not scheduling the task. You're gambling with it. Betting that life won't interrupt you. Betting that your energy, your clarity, your relationships will all still be intact when you finally feel ready. But intelligent men know this. Later is an illusion. It feels like control, but it's actually surrender. They act now, even if it's small, even if it's awkward, even if they don't feel ready. Because waiting for perfect is a trap that leaves most men broken and most dreams undone. So what's the alternative? Simple. You say, "What can I do today to move this 1 inch forward?" Not 10 steps. Not the whole solution. Just the next meaningful movement. Because momentum is built in whispers, not declarations. And regret? Regret is built in silence. The Stoics believed that urgency wasn't panic. It was clarity, knowing that the window is open now and might not be tomorrow. So pause for a second. Scan your life. What have you been postponing? A phone call? A boundary? An apology? A dream? Now, ask yourself, what would it cost me if I never got to do it? That's what's at stake every time you say, "I'll do it later." So act, even if it's messy, because silence and delay have never built anything worth remembering. But action, even imperfect action, that builds a life a man can stand on. Seventh, a phrase that sounds like strength but stinks of fear. At least I'm being honest. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Honesty, truth, raw and unfiltered. But here's the problem. Not all honesty is strength. Some of it is cowardice in disguise. Because real honesty, Stoic honesty, is not an excuse to be harsh. It's a discipline, a responsibility, a practice of clarity with conscience. But when a man says, "At least I'm being honest," right after wounding someone, what he's really saying is, "I don't care how I made you feel. I just want to feel righteous." That's not virtue. That's emotional laziness. Let's be clear. Truth without compassion is not a virtue. It's a weapon. And weak men love weapons they can swing without consequence. Epictetus warned us, "Be gentle yet firm," which means speak truth, yes, but never as a club, never to dominate, never to dump your emotional trash and call it integrity. I once knew a man who prided himself on being brutally honest. He always added, "just being real," after tearing someone down. He thought it made him a leader, but all it made him was feared. Not respected, not followed, feared. He was using honesty to avoid the real work, courageous silence, constructive correction, saying what needed to be said without needing to feel superior. That's the Stoic way. Truth that serves the moment, not the ego. So how do you know the difference? Ask yourself this. Am I saying this to help or to offload my own frustration? Am I speaking to clarify or to control? Is my honesty healing or just harsh? Because real men don't hide behind honesty. They stand inside it, fully, soberly, without drama or disguise. Sometimes that means telling a hard truth, but only when it's been tempered with intention, when it's timed, earned, held like a scalpel, not swung like a hammer. Intelligent men know the world doesn't need more brutal honesty. It needs honest men, the kind who think before they speak, who carry words like tools, not trophies. Stoicism doesn't celebrate raw truth. It celebrates disciplined truth, truth that aligns with virtue, justice, and clarity. So the next time you feel the urge to say, "Hey, I'm just being honest," stop and ask yourself, would Marcus Aurelius call this courage? Or would he call it ego? Because if you need to announce your honesty, it might be masking something else. Insecurity, resentment, the need to be right more than the need to be useful. In the end, here's what separates strong men from reactive ones. Strong men don't just speak truth. They steward it. They use it with precision, care, and timing. Because they know truth in the wrong hands becomes just another lie. Eighth, the habit that feels like healing but poisons instead. Emotional dumping disguised as honesty. You've heard it. You've probably done it. That moment where you unleash every frustration in your chest and call it being real. But let's be clear, you're not healing. You're bleeding on everyone near you and expecting them to hand you a medal for opening up. I just need to vent. I'm speaking my truth. I had to get it off my chest. What you don't realize is that the more often you do this, the less seriously people take you, because you've trained them to associate your voice with chaos, not clarity. Here's the Stoic truth. Real emotional strength is not in how much you say. It's in how little you need to say to stay grounded. Epictetus put it simply, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them, which means your spiral isn't caused by life. It's caused by your interpretation of life. And the constant need to dump that interpretation on others is not expression. It's emotional outsourcing. It's asking other people to carry what you haven't yet processed. I once knew a man who turned every conversation into a monologue. He wasn't a bad person, just unaware. He thought his vulnerability was connection. But it wasn't. It was a leak. And people eventually started disappearing from his life. Not because he was broken, but because his self-expression had no boundaries. And when emotion has no boundaries, it becomes manipulation, even if unintentional. The Stoics teach us to master our internal world before we drag it into the external one. That doesn't mean bottling up your feelings. It means filtering them with clarity and intent. You write, you walk, you breathe, you think. Then and only then do you speak. You don't dump, you deliver. You craft what matters, and you let silence hold the rest. Because the strongest man in the room is not the one who's the most in touch with his emotions. It's the one who can feel deeply without forcing anyone else to manage it for him. There's power in restraint. There's honor in silence. There's clarity in waiting until your storm has passed, before inviting someone else into the weather. So the next time your chest fills with fire and your mouth rushes to open, pause. Ask, am I expressing this to gain clarity or to dump my discomfort into someone else's day? That question alone can change the temperature in your life. Because real Stoic strength isn't about repression. It's about responsibility for your state, for your story, for your impact. An intelligent man speaks less, not because he has less to say, but because he knows his words carry weight. And when he does speak, people listen, because he's not venting, he's leading. You've just walked through 8 things intelligent men never say. Not because they're better than you, not because they've never slipped, but because at some point they looked in the mirror and got honest. Not emotionally honest, existentially honest. They saw how their words were shaping their world, and they stopped treating speech like noise and started treating it like strategy. They stopped saying, "I already know that," Because they finally realized how much they didn't. They stopped saying, "That's impossible," because they knew fear could disguise itself as logic. They stopped blaming, stopped isolating, stopped postponing. They even stopped being brutally honest when they realized the only thing they were cutting was connection. And maybe now you see one of those habits in yourself. Good. That means this isn't just a video. It's a turning point. Because Stoicism isn't about knowing ancient quotes. It's about recognizing your patterns, mastering your impulses, and shutting your mouth long enough to hear the truth rise up from within. So here's your challenge. Not to speak better, but to speak less. To let your restraint say more about you than your cleverness ever could. To become a man whose silence carries weight. Because in that silence, you'll start to hear what matters. And when you do speak, people won't just hear you, they'll feel you. And that is the mark of a man who doesn't just sound intelligent. He is. If even one of these patterns hit home, let it be the last time it controls you. Subscribe if you're not done becoming dangerous. And share this with another man who's ready to shut up and step forward